She refused a blank check. The Sheikh Billionaire saw the handwriting was his missing wife's. The morning air in Brooklyn carried the scent of fresh coffee and baked bread as Sarah Mitchell tied her apron behind the counter of Miller's Café. At 26, she had mastered the art of invisibility. Her movements were efficient, her smile polite but distant, her eyes carefully avoiding prolonged contact with customers. She preferred it that way. 3 years of working at this modest café had taught her that the less people noticed you, the fewer questions they asked, and questions were something Sarah couldn't afford. She didn't remember much about her life before the accident. The doctors called it retrograde amnesia, a blank slate where memories should have been. All she knew was what the Robinson family had told her. They found her unconscious on a rural road in upstate New York, no identification, no belongings, just severe head trauma and a body covered in bruises. They took her to the hospital, paid for her initial treatment, and when no one came looking for her, they helped her start over. Sarah Mitchell wasn't her real name, but it was the only one she had. The cafe's door chimed, and Sarah glanced up from wiping down tables. Her breath caught in her throat. A group of men in expensive suits entered, but they were clearly just an entourage. The man at the center commanded every eye in the room. He was tall, perhaps 6'3", with dark hair touched with gray at the temples, sharp features that belonged on ancient coins, and eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they surveyed. His presence filled the modest Brooklyn café like a lion in a cage. "Table for Sheikh Al-Rashid," one of the suited men announced to Tom. The cafe owner nearly dropped the coffee pot in his hands. Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid moved through the cafe as if he owned it, which, given his net worth, he probably could have purchased with pocket change. He chose a table by the window, and his security team fanned out strategically. Tom rushed over to Sarah, his face flushed with panic. "Sarah, you need to take that table. Be perfect. Do you understand? That man probably tips more than we make in a month." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she picked up her notepad. She didn't know why her heart was racing. She approached the table, keeping her eyes professionally lowered. "Good morning, gentlemen. Welcome to Miller's Café. May I start you with—" "Coffee. Black. Immediately." Khalid's voice was deep, accented, and carried the tone of someone who had never been told no in his life. He didn't look at her as he spoke, his attention fixed on his phone. "Of course, sir. And for breakfast. Whatever you serve that passes for food in this place." His dismissive tone made it clear he expected disappointment. Sarah felt a familiar surge of determination. She had learned long ago not to let arrogant customers affect her. "I recommend our Belgian waffles with fresh berries and our house-made maple syrup. The eggs Benedict are also exceptional." For the first time, Khalid looked up from his phone. His eyes met hers, and something strange happened. He froze. His phone slipped slightly in his grip. Those calculating dark eyes widened almost imperceptibly, scanning her face with an intensity that made Sarah step back instinctively. "Sir, your order?" Khalid blinked, as if snapping out of a trance. His jaw tightened. "The waffles, and orange juice, fresh squeezed, not from concentrate." "We only serve fresh squeeze, sir." Sarah turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Wait." The word came out sharper than he intended. "What is your name?" "Sarah, sir. I'll have your order right out." She escaped to the kitchen, her heart pounding inexplicably. Behind her, Khalid sat rigid in his chair, his mind racing. The way she moved, the slight tilt of her head when she spoke, the gentle curve of her smile, the soft cadence of her voice. It was impossible. Layla had been gone 3 years. Layla was dead. She had to be. But the woman who had just taken his order— "Sir, are you all right?" One of his advisors leaned in concerned. Khalid forced himself to focus. "That waitress. Find out everything about her. Name, background, where she lives, everything. I want a full report within the hour." The meal passed in a blur. Khalid barely tasted the food, though objectively it was far better than he had expected. His eyes kept drifting to Sarah as she moved through the café, serving other customers with efficient grace. Every gesture, every movement, screamed familiarity. But she showed no recognition when she refilled his coffee, no spark of memory when she asked if everything was satisfactory. When he finished, Sarah brought the check. Khalid pulled out his personal checkbook, something he rarely carried but had needed for a business meeting earlier. Without filling in an amount, he signed the bottom and pushed it across the table to her. "For your excellent service." Sarah looked down at the blank check, then back at him with wide eyes. "Sir, I can't accept this." "Why not? Fill in whatever amount you think is appropriate." "It wouldn't be right." Her voice was soft but firm. She picked up a napkin and wrote something on it, then placed it next to the check. "Thank you for the generous offer, but I prefer to earn my tips through good service, not charity. I hope you enjoyed your meal." Khalid watched her walk away, torn between admiration and frustration. Then his eyes fell on the napkin. Written in neat, flowing script was a simple message. "Thank you for your kindness, but I cannot accept. Wishing you a wonderful day." The pen dropped from Khalid's fingers, the blood drained from his face. His hands shook as he picked up the napkin, bringing it close, studying every curve and flourish of the handwriting. It was impossible. It was undeniable. This handwriting was Layla's. Every loop of the Y, every cross of the T, the distinctive way the letters connected. He had seen this handwriting on love notes tucked into his briefcase, on birthday cards, on the last letter Layla had left on his desk before she disappeared. Khalid had that letter memorized, had stared at it for hours in the dark days after she vanished, searching for clues, for meaning, for anything that might tell him where she had gone. This was Layla's handwriting, which meant this was Layla, his wife, his missing wife, standing 10 feet away, clearing tables, with no idea who she was. Khalid stood so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Every head in the café turned. He strode toward Sarah with purpose, the napkin clutched in his hand like evidence at a trial. "You," his voice was tight with barely controlled emotion, "I need to speak to you now." Sarah turned, confusion and alarm flickering across her face. "Sir, if there was a problem with your meal." "Who are you?" The question came out more harshly than he intended. "Your real name. Who are you really?" I'm Sarah Mitchell. I already told you." "No." Khalid moved closer, and Sarah backed against the counter. He held up the napkin. "This handwriting. Where did you learn to write like this?" "I don't understand. What are you—" "Answer me!" His voice rose, drawing concerned looks from his security team. Tom rushed over, ready to defend his employee. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step back." Khalid ignored him, his eyes locked on Sarah. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone, scrolling frantically through his photos. He found what he was looking for. A picture of Layla from 4 years ago, standing in their garden in Dubai. Her dark hair catching the sunlight, her smile radiant and full of life. He thrust the phone toward Sarah. "Look at this woman. Look at her and tell me you don't know who she is." Sarah's eyes fell on the photo and her breath caught. The woman in the picture looked exactly like her. Same face, same eyes, same hair color, but that was impossible. Sarah had never been to Dubai. She had never worn clothes that expensive. She had never smiled like that, with such confident joy. I don't know who that is." "That is my wife." Khalid's voice broke. "Her name is Layla Al-Rashid. She disappeared 3 years ago, and you are her." The café fell silent. Every customer was staring now. Sarah felt the room spinning. I'm not. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I'm a waitress from Brooklyn. I've never met you before. I don't know who that woman is, even if she looks like me. This is some kind of mistake." "Your handwriting." "Lots of people have similar handwriting." Sarah was backing toward the kitchen now, desperate for escape. But Khalid could see now.
could see past the simple clothes and the timid demeanor to the bone structure, the exact shade of green in her eyes, the small scar above her left eyebrow that Layla had gotten as a child. This wasn't someone who looked like Layla. This was Layla. 3 years ago, Khalid said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Did something happen to you? An accident? How do you... Tell me.
She swallowed hard. I was in a car accident. I don't remember it. I don't remember anything from before I woke up in the hospital. They said I had amnesia. No one ever came looking for me. I had no ID, no family. The Robinsons took me in, helped me build a new life. Tears were forming in her eyes now. Please, I don't know what you want from me, but I'm not your wife. I can't be. I don't remember being anyone's wife. The pain that crossed Khalid's face was so raw that several people in the café looked away. He stood there, this powerful billionaire who commanded respect and fear across continents, looking utterly lost. "You don't remember me," he said softly. "You don't remember any of it." "I'm sorry." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "I'm so sorry if I remind you of someone you lost, but I'm not her." "Yes, you are." Khalid straightened and his business demeanor returned, though his eyes betrayed his turmoil. "And I'm going to prove it." "Where do you live?" "I'm not telling you that." "Then I'll find out." He gestured to his security team. "I have the resources to discover everything about Sarah Mitchell within the hour. You can cooperate, or you can make this difficult. But either way, we're going to get to the truth." Tom stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Sir, you need to leave now, or I'm calling the police." "Call them." Khalid pulled out a business card and placed it on the counter. "Tell them Sheikh Layla Al-Rashid is here, regarding his missing wife, who was declared legally dead 2 years ago after disappearing in circumstances that were never explained. Tell them I have evidence that she's alive and suffering from amnesia. I assure you they'll be very interested." He turned back to Sarah, his expression softening. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to force you to do anything. But Layla, Sarah, whoever you believe you are right now, you deserve to know the truth about your past. And his voice caught, I've spent 3 years searching for you. I'm not walking away now." Sarah stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Part of her wanted to run, to disappear into the Brooklyn streets and never look back. But another part, a part buried deep beneath 3 years of constructed memories and careful anonymity, was whispering that this man was telling the truth, that somewhere in the blank spaces of her mind she knew him, that the reason her heart was racing wasn't fear, it was recognition. "I need time," she whispered. "Please, this is too much." Khalid nodded slowly. "Take the rest of the day. Think about it. But tomorrow, we're going to start finding answers. You have my card. Call me when you're ready to know who you really are." He left the café, his entourage following. Through the window, Sarah watched him climb into a black SUV with diplomatic plates. As it pulled away, Sarah sank into the nearest chair, her legs no longer able to support her. Tom crouched beside her, his anger replaced by concern. "Sarah, are you okay? Should I call someone?" "I don't know," she whispered, staring at the business card on the counter. "I don't know anything anymore." That night, Sarah sat in her tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn, the business card in one hand and her phone in the other. She had spent hours researching Sheikh Layla Al-Rashid. The man was exactly who he claimed to be, one of the wealthiest individuals in the Middle East, with business interests spanning technology, real estate, and sustainable energy. Articles from 3 years ago detailed the mysterious disappearance of his wife, Layla,
an American woman who he had met while she was studying international law at Columbia University. The photos of Layla Al-Rashid were everywhere online, and they were all photos of Sarah's face. She stared at image after image. Layla at charity galas in designer gowns. Layla speaking at conferences about women's rights in the Middle East. Layla laughing with Khalid at their wedding, her hand resting on his chest, her eyes full of love. In every photo, Sarah saw herself, but a version of herself she didn't recognize. Confident, educated, loved. Who was she really? Sarah Mitchell, the Brooklyn waitress with no past? Or Layla Al-Rashid, the missing wife of a billionaire? Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Her heart pounding, she answered. "Hello? It's Khalid." His voice was calmer now, controlled. "I'm sorry for how I approached you today. It was a shock to see you after all this time. I should have been more careful." "You still think I'm her, your wife?" "I don't think. I know." A pause. "Sarah, Layla, I understand this is overwhelming, but I need you to trust me. There's a way to know for certain. A DNA test. I have samples from our home in Dubai, hair from Layla's brush, items she touched. If you agree to provide a sample, we can have results in 48 hours. Sarah closed her eyes. "And if the test says I am her, what then?" "Then we figure out what happened. We find out why you disappeared, why you lost your memory, and we—" his voice softened, "we deal with whatever comes next, together. And if I'm not her, if I'm just someone who happens to look like your wife, then I'll apologize for disrupting your life, and I'll never bother you again. But I have to know. Can you understand that? 3 years of wondering, of hoping, of checking every lead that went nowhere. You're the first real answer I've found. Please, let me help you discover the truth." Sarah thought about her blank past, the void where her memory should be, the constant feeling of being incomplete. Maybe it was time to stop running from the questions. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do the test." 2 days later, Sarah sat in a private medical facility in Manhattan, a place so luxurious it didn't look like a hospital at all. Khalid sat across from her in the waiting room, his hands clasped tightly together, his usual arrogance nowhere to be seen. He looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept since their first meeting. "Tell me about her," Sarah said suddenly. "About Layla. If I'm supposed to be her, I should know who she was." Khalid looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Then he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his severe features. "She was brilliant, top of her class at Columbia Law School, specializing in international human rights law. She spoke 5 languages fluently: English, Arabic, French, Mandarin, and Spanish. She learned Mandarin in 6 months because she thought it would be useful for negotiations." "She sounds intimidating." She was, but she was also kind, gentle. She volunteered at refugee centers, taught English to children who didn't speak the language. She could negotiate billion-dollar contracts in the afternoon and then spend her evening reading stories to orphans. She made me want to be better, to use my wealth and influence for good, not just for profit. Khalid's voice grew thick with emotion. "How did you meet?" "At a conference in New York. She was presenting a paper on legal frameworks for protecting women's rights in conservative societies. I was there representing my family's business interests. She challenged every statement I made, pointed out every flaw in our company's practices. I was furious and completely captivated. I asked her to dinner. She refused. It took me 3 months to convince her to give me a chance." "Why did she say yes?" "She told me later it was because I actually listened. I changed policies in our company based on her recommendations. I didn't just want to impress her, I wanted to deserve her. Khalid looked directly at Sarah. She made me earn her love, and when she finally gave it to me, it was the greatest gift I'd ever received. Sarah felt her throat tighten. What happened to her? To us? Why did she disappear? I don't know. The pain in those 3 words was profound. She went to visit her parents in upstate New York. She was driving back to the airport when her car was found abandoned on a rural road. There was blood on the driver's seat, signs of a struggle, but no body. The police searched for weeks. My investigators searched for months. We found nothing. It was as if she vanished into thin air. The door to the doctor's office opened. A woman in a white coat stepped out, holding a folder. Her expression was neutral, professional. Sheikh Khalid, Miss Mitchell, the results are ready. Khalid and Sarah stood simultaneously. Sarah's hands were shaking. This was it, the moment that would define everything. They followed the doctor into a private office. She sat behind a large desk and opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents. The DNA analysis is conclusive, she said. The samples provide.
Sarah stood frozen, looking down at this man who claimed to be her husband, this stranger who loved her with an intensity that terrified her. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and touched his hair. The moment her fingers made contact, something sparked in her mind, a flash of memory. Standing in a garden, her hands in someone's hair, laughing as he complained about her ruining his carefully styled appearance. The image vanished as quickly as it came, leaving her gasping. "I saw something," she whispered. "Just for a second. A garden. Your hair was shorter. I was laughing." Khalid looked up, hope blazing in his eyes. "Our wedding day. You insisted on messing up my hair before the ceremony. You said I looked too serious." "I don't remember. It was just a flash. It's a start." Khalid stood, wiping his eyes, attempting to regain his composure. "The memories are still there, buried. We can help you recover them." "I don't know if I want to." Sarah's voice was small, frightened. "What if remembering means losing who I am now? Sarah Mitchell might not be who I was born as, but she's who I've been for 3 years. She's real to me." "Then we'll find a way to honor both." Khalid reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he took her hand gently. "You don't have to become someone you're not, but you deserve to know your own story. And his voice cracked, "I promise I'll be patient. I won't push, but please, let me help you find yourself." Sarah looked at their joined hands. She should pull away, she should run, but something about his touch felt right in a way she couldn't explain. "What happens now?" "Now," Khalid said softly, "we start searching for answers. Together." Neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street from the medical facility, or the man inside taking photographs. Neither of them knew that news of Layla Al-Rashid's miraculous reappearance was already racing through certain channels connected to people who had very good reasons for wanting her to stay disappeared. The past, it seemed, wasn't ready to stay buried. Over the next few days, Khalid moved Sarah, he still struggled to think of her by that name, into his penthouse on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The apartment occupied the entire top floor of a luxury building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Central Park and the city beyond. Every surface gleamed with wealth. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that Sarah recognized from her research as pieces worth millions. "This is too much," she protested, standing in the massive living room, feeling utterly out of place. "I can't stay here." "You lived in a palace in Dubai," Khalid pointed out gently. "This was your second home. You decorated half of it yourself."
Sarah looked around with new eyes, searching for any hint of her own taste in the elegant furnishings. Nothing felt familiar. "I don't remember any of this." "I know." Khalid gestured to one of the security personnel stationed discreetly near the door. "But until we understand what happened to you 3 years ago, I need to keep you safe. Someone hurt you, Layla. Someone left you to die on that road. Until we know who and why, you're staying where I can protect you." "What if they weren't trying to hurt me specifically? What if it was just a random attack, a robbery gone wrong?" Khalid's expression darkened. "I've considered every possibility. I've spent 3 years considering every possibility. And none of the random explanations make sense. Your car was found with the engine still running, your purse and phone still inside. Nothing was stolen. But there was blood, your blood, and signs that you'd been dragged from the vehicle. Someone wanted you gone, Layla, and I'm going to find out who." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "You think someone tried to murder me?" "Yes, and you survived. You disappeared, and they assumed you were dead. But now," he hesitated, "now you've resurfaced. If whoever hurt you finds out you're alive, they might try again." "Then why did you make such a public scene at the café? Why tell anyone you'd found me?" "Because I was in shock. Because I wasn't thinking clearly." Khalid ran his hair through his hair, frustration evident. "I've already taken steps to control the information. My security team has been instructed to keep your reappearance quiet. Only a select few people know. But I'm not naive enough to think we can keep it secret forever." Sarah sank onto one of the leather sofas, her mind reeling. "This is insane. 3 days ago I was a waitress. Now I'm apparently a billionaire's wife who survived a murder attempt and lost her memory. This can't be real." "I wish it weren't." Khalid sat across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I know this is overwhelming, but we're going to figure this out. I've already contacted the best neurologists in the country. We have appointments starting tomorrow. They specialize in trauma-related amnesia. If anyone can help you remember, they can." "And if I never remember? If the memories are just gone?" Khalid was quiet for a long moment. "Then we start over. I get to know the woman you are now, and you get to know me. It won't be the same as what we had. But it could be something." Sarah studied him, this intense, powerful man who looked at her with such desperate hope. "Do you tell me honestly, do you see me when you look at me? Or do you just see her, your Layla?" The question clearly hurt him. "I see both. I see the woman I married, the face I dreamed about every night for 3 years, but I also see someone different, someone more cautious, more guarded, someone who survived something terrible and built a new life from nothing. That takes strength Layla never had to prove she possessed." "Sarah," she corrected softly, "if we're going to do this, you need to call me Sarah, at least until I remember being Layla." It cost him something to agree. She could see it in his eyes. But he nodded. "Sarah, then, for now." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The penthouse bedroom Khalid had given her was larger than her entire Brooklyn apartment, with a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud. But every time she closed her eyes, fragments of memories flickered through her mind. None of them made sense. A flash of a woman's face, older, kind, speaking in Arabic. A glimpse of a stone building with intricate geometric patterns. The sound of a call to prayer echoing across a city at sunset. And underneath it all, a creeping sense of dread, a feeling that she had been running from something. She got up and wandered through the dark apartment. Khalid had shown her where everything was, told her to make herself at home. The penthouse had a library, and Sarah found herself drawn to it. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with volumes in multiple languages. She ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles. International law, human rights, Middle Eastern history. And then, on a lower shelf, she found them. Photo albums. Sarah pulled one out and sat on the floor, opening it with trembling hands. The first page showed a wedding. Layla, Sarah, whatever name applied, stood in an elegant white gown, laughing as he lifted her off his feet. The joy on both their faces was incandescent. She turned the pages, watching their life unfold. Vacations in Paris, Dubai, Tokyo. Layla speaking at conferences, Khalid watching from the audience with unmistakable pride. The two of them at charity events, at family gatherings, at quiet moments captured candidly. In every photo, Layla looked happy, confident, loved. She touched one of the pictures, a close-up of Layla's face as she looked at something off camera. The expression was so full of love and warmth that Sarah felt tears forming. "That was taken in our home in Dubai." Sarah jumped, slamming the album shut. Khalid stood in the doorway, wearing a simple t-shirt and pajama pants, looking more human than she'd seen him. "I'm sorry. I couldn't sleep. I didn't mean to snoop." "You're not snooping. This is your home. Those are your memories." He moved into the room, sitting on the floor across from her. "That particular photo was taken on our anniversary, our first year married. We spent the entire day in bed, ordering room service and watching old movies. You were laughing at something I said. I don't even remember what. But I remember thinking I wanted to capture that exact expression, that exact moment of happiness." Sarah opened the album again, looking at the photo with new understanding. "She looks so sure of everything, so certain of where she belongs. You were. You had this way of walking into any room and owning it, no matter how intimidating the company. Diplomats, politicians, business tycoons, you could hold your own against anyone." "I'm not like that now." "Aren't you?" Khalid smiled slightly. "You refused a blank check from a sheikh in front of his entire entourage. That takes courage. The clothes might be different, the circumstances have changed, but the strength is still there, Sarah. I can see it." She wanted to believe him, but looking at these photos—
Is that what you want? For me to be both? I want you to be whoever you need to be. His voice was rough with emotion. 3 years ago, I lost everything that mattered. If I get even a piece of that back, if I get to know you again in any form, that's more than I ever thought I'd have. Don't worry about disappointing me, Sarah. Just worry about finding yourself." They sat in the library for hours, Khalid telling stories about Layla, about their life together. Sarah listened, trying to feel some connection to the woman in the photographs, some spark of recognition. And occasionally, just occasionally, something would resonate. A turn of phrase Khalid used would feel familiar. A description of a place would trigger a flash of color and sound in her mind. It wasn't memory, not exactly, but it was something. As dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sarah made a decision. I want to know what happened. I want to understand why I was on that road, why someone hurt me, why I disappeared. Even if the memories never come back fully, I need to know the truth. Khalid's expression was fierce, determined. Then we'll find it, together. I promise you, Sarah, we'll find whoever did this to you, and they'll answer for every moment of pain they caused. He had no idea how right he was, or how dangerous the truth would prove to be. The next morning, Khalid's sister, Amira, arrived at the penthouse unannounced. Sarah was in the kitchen, a space so sophisticated she barely dared touch anything, attempting to make coffee, when a strikingly beautiful woman swept into the room. She was in her early 30s, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than Sarah's yearly salary, her dark hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She stopped dead when she saw Sarah, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, it's true, you're alive!" "Amira." Khalid appeared in the doorway, his tone warning.
We discussed this. You were supposed to call first. I had to see for myself. Amira moved closer to Sarah, her eyes scanning every detail of her face. Layla, we all thought you were dead. I don't remember you, Sarah said softly. I'm sorry. She has amnesia, Khalid explained. She doesn't remember anything from before the accident. Amira's expression shifted from shock to something harder to read. Nothing at all? Fragments, flashes, but no clear memories, no. How convenient. The words were barely audible, but Sarah heard them. So did Khalid. Amira, what are you implying? Nothing, brother, nothing at all. But Amira's smile didn't reach her eyes. I'm just surprised. 3 years, and suddenly she appears remembering nothing. You have to admit the timing is interesting. What timing? Sarah asked, confused. Khalid shot his sister a warning look. Amira, don't. She deserves to know, especially if she's really Layla. Amira turned to Sarah, her expression calculating. Your husband is about to finalize a business deal worth $500 million, a deal that was complicated by your disappearance and the questions surrounding it. Some of our business partners were concerned about legal issues, about potential scandals. Your miraculous reappearance right before the contracts are signed solves a lot of problems. Are you suggesting I'm lying? Sarah's voice was steady despite her shock. That I'm pretending to be Layla for money? I'm suggesting that this situation is extremely convenient for certain people. That's enough. Khalid's voice was cold, authoritative. The DNA test was conclusive. Sarah, Layla, is my wife. The fact that she's alive is a miracle, not a conspiracy. And if you can't be supportive, Amira, you can leave. Amira raised her hands in mock surrender. Fine, I'm sorry. I'm just protective of you, Khalid. You've been through so much these past 3 years. I don't want to see you hurt again. Then trust me. Trust my judgment. Amira's gaze returned to Sarah, and this time there was something else in her eyes. Not hostility, but concern. Can I speak with you alone just for a moment? Khalid looked ready to refuse, but Sarah surprised herself by agreeing. It's fine, we can talk. Once Khalid reluctantly left the room, Amira's demeanor changed completely. The sophisticated mask dropped, replaced with genuine worry. I'm sorry for what I said before. I had to see how you'd react, if you'd crumble or fight back. Layla would have fought back. I don't understand. What are you really here for? Amira glanced at the door, then moved closer, lowering her voice. To warn you about what happened 3 years ago, about why you disappeared. Khalid doesn't know the whole truth, and I've kept it from him to protect him. But if you're really Layla, if your memories come back, you need to be prepared. Prepared for what? For the fact that your accident wasn't an accident, and the person who wanted you gone wasn't some random stranger. It was family. Before Sarah could respond, before she could ask the 100 questions exploding in her mind, Khalid returned. Amira, I need you to go, now. I was just leaving. Amira squeezed Sarah's hand briefly. It's good to have you back, Layla, truly. Just be careful who you trust. After she left, Sarah stood frozen, Amira's words echoing in her mind. Khalid noticed her expression immediately. What did she say to you? Sarah wanted to tell him, but something held her back. The same instinct that had kept her anonymous and safe for 3 years. Just that she's glad I'm alive. That's all. She could see he didn't entirely believe her, but he didn't push. The neurology appointment is an hour. We should get ready. As Sarah went to change, her mind was racing. Family. Amira had said it was family who wanted her gone. But whose family? The Al-Rashids or Layla's own? And more importantly, were they still a threat? The neurology appointment was both fascinating and frustrating. Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the country's leading experts in memory disorders, spent 3 hours putting Sarah through a battery of tests. cognitive assessments, memory recall exercises, even hypnosis. At the end of it all, her conclusion was cautiously optimistic. The amnesia is real, she told them in her office afterward. The brain scans show significant scarring in the hippocampus and temporal lobes, consistent with severe head trauma. The fact that you've retained basic functional memories, language, motor skills, general knowledge, is textbook retrograde amnesia. Can she recover them? Khalid asked urgently. Possibly. Memory recovery after this type of trauma is unpredictable. Some patients recover everything over time. Some recover nothing. Most fall somewhere in between. Turn a phrase Khalid used would feel connections that can help it access the stored memories. Over the following week, Khalid became Sarah's guide to Layla's life. He showed her videos of Layla giving speeches, and Sarah marveled at her own confidence, her eloquence, speaking in multiple languages with ease. They visited Columbia University, walking the campus where Layla had studied. Khalid showed her the lecture hall where they'd first met, the café where he'd finally convinced her to have dinner with him. "You ordered a cappuccino and a croissant," Khalid said, standing in that same café, now filled with students who had no idea they were witnessing a man trying to resurrect his past. "You told me I had exactly 45 minutes to spare, and you shouldn't waste them. So I asked you one question. What matters most to you in the world? Do you remember what you said?" Sarah shook her head, but something was stirring in her mind, a feeling of rightness about this place. "You said justice. Not the kind you get in courtrooms, though that matters too, but real justice. The kind where a woman in Yemen can go to school without fear, that a refugee family can find safety, where power doesn't automatically mean you win. Then you looked at me and said, and I don't think that's something you understand, sitting on your throne of inherited wealth." Khalid smiled. "You called me out from the first minute, and I fell in love with you for it." "She sounds brave. Braver than I am." "You're the same person, Sarah. You survived something that should have killed you. You built a new life from nothing. That's brave." But Sarah wasn't sure. The woman in the videos, the brilliant lawyer who could argue human rights cases before international tribunals, seemed like a different species from the waitress who had been too timid to even ask for better shifts.
That night, sleeping in the penthouse, Sarah dreamed. She was in a car, driving on a dark road. Rain pounded the windshield. Her phone was ringing, but she couldn't reach it. There was something in the back seat. No, someone. A figure, leaning forward, saying something she couldn't hear over the thunder. Fear, pure and primal, flooded through her. She tried to speed up, but the car wouldn't respond. And then Sarah woke up screaming. Khalid burst into her room within seconds, followed by 2 security guards. He waved them off and sat on the edge of her bed, his hand hovering near hers but not touching. "You're safe. You're here. Whatever you dreamed, it's not real anymore." It felt real. Sarah was shaking, her heart pounding. "I was in a car. It was raining. Someone was with me in the back seat. I was scared, so scared." Khalid's expression grew grim. "It rained the night you disappeared. The police report mentioned it. Your car was found the next morning, but the crash happened during a storm." "There was someone in the car with me. I couldn't see their face, but they were there. They said something, but I couldn't hear it." Sarah looked up at Khalid, tears streaming down her face. What if Amira was right? What if it wasn't an accident? What if someone I knew did this to me? "Then we'll find them," Khalid's voice was steel, "and they'll regret it for the rest of their very short, very miserable life." He stayed with her the rest of the night, sitting in a chair by her bed, a silent guardian. As dawn broke, Sarah made a decision. "I want to go there, to where my car was found. Maybe seeing the place will help me remember." Khalid looked concerned. "Are you sure? It might be traumatic." "I need to know what happened to me. I need to face it." "Then we'll go, together." 2 days later, they drove upstate, following the route Layla would have taken 3 years ago. The landscape shifted from urban to suburban to rural.
trees closing in on both sides of the road. Khalid's security team followed in a second vehicle, maintaining a discreet distance. Sarah felt her anxiety rising with every mile. This road felt familiar, in a way the penthouse and Columbia University hadn't. She'd been here before. Recently, in geological terms. 3 years was nothing to the ancient trees towering over them. "It's just ahead," Khalid said quietly. "The police found your car about 2 miles from here, pulled halfway into a ditch. Are you sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure." They rounded a curve and Khalid pulled over. Sarah got out of the car, her legs unsteady. The location was unremarkable, just a straight stretch of rural road, trees on both sides, a drainage ditch running parallel. But the moment her feet touched the ground, something shifted in Sarah's mind. She'd stood in this exact spot before. "This is it. This is where it happened." Khalid was beside her immediately, his hand on her arm steadying. "What do you remember?" Sarah closed her eyes, letting the memories come. "It was raining. So hard I could barely see. I was driving too fast, trying to get to the airport. I was upset. No, I was angry. Someone had betrayed me. Who? I can't see the face, but I remember the feeling, like my whole world was crashing down, like everything I'd worked for was being destroyed." Sarah walked forward, her feet carrying her to a specific spot on the shoulder. "I pulled over here. No, I was forced to pull over. There were headlights behind me, high beams blinding me. Another car. They wouldn't pass. They just stayed there, pushing me to stop." "What happened next?" Khalid's voice was tense. I pressed my hands to my temples, pain shooting through my head as I tried to force the memories forward. Someone got out, came to my window. I knew them. I rolled down the window because I knew them. Who was it, Layla? Who? I can't see. They're just a shadow. But I know I trusted them. And that's why, when they attacked me, I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was a mistake, an accident, but it wasn't. They meant to hurt me. They pulled me from the car, and I fought back, but they were stronger. My head hit something. The car, a rock, I don't know. And then darkness, just darkness." Sarah collapsed, and Khalid caught her, lowering them both to the ground. She was sobbing now, the trauma of that night flooding back without the context of who or why. "Someone I knew tried to kill me. Someone I trusted, and I can't remember who." He held her tightly, his own face pale with fury and fear. "We'll find them. I swear to you, Sarah, we will find them." From the shadow of the trees, 50 yards away, someone watched through binoculars. The figure lowered the binoculars slowly, lips pressed into a grim line. She was remembering. That was a problem that would need to be solved, permanently this time. The figure pulled out a phone and dialed. "It's me. We have a situation. Layla is alive and her memory is coming back. Yes, I'm sure. I just watched her remember the attack. We need to move up the timeline." A pause, as the person on the other end responded. "I don't care how complicated it is. She can identify us. Everything we've built, everything we've done for 3 years, it all falls apart if she talks. So we do what we should have done that night. We finish it." The figure pocketed the phone and took one last look at Layla and Khalid, still on the ground by the roadside, holding each other. "I'm sorry it has to be this way, Layla. I really am. But you should have stayed dead." Back at the penthouse, Khalid made phone calls while Sarah showered, trying to wash away the feeling of dirt and fear that clung to her skin. They had someone new to interview, a detective who had worked Layla's case 3 years ago and had never been satisfied with the inconclusive findings. Detective Marcus Chen arrived that evening carrying boxes of case files. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too much injustice. "Sheikh Al-Rashid, it's good to meet you in person, though I wish it were under different circumstances." He turned to Sarah, his expression softening. "Mrs. Al-Rashid, I'm glad you're alive. I spent months looking for you." "Thank you, and please call me Sarah." They sat in the living room, Chen spreading files across the coffee table. Crime scene photos, witness statements, forensic reports. "I'm going to be honest with you both. This was never a simple missing persons case. There were too many anomalies, too many things that didn't add up. Your car was found with the engine still running, your belongings inside, but you were gone. There was blood on the driver's seat and the ground nearby suggesting significant injury, but the blood trail just stopped. No drag marks, no signs of a vehicle removing you from the scene. It was as if you vanished into thin air." "You think someone covered their tracks," Khalid said. "I think someone with resources and knowledge covered their tracks very well. The rain that night washed away most of the forensic evidence. What little we found suggested a struggle, but we couldn't get any usable DNA besides yours." Chen pulled out a photo. "However, there was one thing that always bothered me. Look at this." The photo showed Layla's car from above, taken by crime scene investigators. Sarah leaned forward, studying it. "I don't see anything unusual. Look at the passenger side. The window is rolled down about 2 inches. In a rainstorm that severe, why would the window be open?" Sarah's breath caught. "Because someone was sitting there. Someone I trusted enough to crack the window and talk to even though it was pouring." "Exactly. The rain came in through that window, soaking the passenger seat. But here's what's interesting. There were no clear prints on the window controls, suggesting they were wiped. Someone thought to cover that detail." Khalid leaned forward, his expression intense. "So we're looking for someone Layla knew well enough to stop for in a storm, someone with the knowledge to cover forensic evidence, and someone with a motive to want her gone? That narrows it down considerably." "There's more." Chen pulled out another file. 3 months before your disappearance, Mrs. Al-Rashid, you filed a report with the police. Do you remember that?" Sarah shook her head. "No. What kind of report?" "You reported a break-in at your Manhattan apartment. Nothing was stolen, but your office had been searched. Papers were moved, your computer had been accessed. You told the investigating officer that you believed someone was looking for specific files related to your work." "What files?" Khalid asked sharply. "You didn't specify. You told the officer you'd handle it privately, but you seemed shaken, according to his notes, genuinely frightened." "I was investigating something dangerous enough that someone broke into my home looking for evidence." "That's my theory," Chen agreed. "I think you discovered something, some kind of illegal activity or scandal, and someone wanted to silence you before you could expose it. The break-in was their first attempt to find out what you knew and retrieve any evidence. When that failed, they escalated to murder." Khalid's voice was cold, controlled, but Sarah could see the fury under the surface.
Attempted murder. She survived. Chen looked at Sarah with respect. "Though I suspect that was more luck than anything. The head injury should have killed you. The fact that you were found at all was a miracle." "Wait," Sarah said suddenly. "How was I found? Who found me?" Chen checked his notes. "A family named Robinson, James and Martha Robinson. They were driving back from visiting relatives when they saw someone lying by the side of the road about 20 miles from where your car was abandoned. They called 911 immediately." 20 miles. Khalid stood, pacing. "How did you get 20 miles from your car in your condition?" "I must have walked, or someone moved me." "In a severe storm, with a head injury that caused you to lose consciousness?" "No, someone moved you. Probably whoever attacked you, assuming you were dead or close to it. They dumped you somewhere remote and left you to die." The brutality of it hung in the air. Sarah felt sick. Chen gathered his files. "I'm going to reopen this case officially. With you alive and memories returning, we have new avenues to investigate.
I'll need you to come to the station in the next few days, give a formal statement, look through our suspect lists." "Suspect lists?" Sarah asked. "You had suspects?" "A few. People with motive and opportunity, but without evidence or a victim, we couldn't pursue them." Chen's smile was grim. "That's changed now." After Chen left, Sarah and Khalid sat in silence, both processing the implications. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Amira knew. When she came here, she said it was family. She was trying to warn me." Khalid's jaw tightened. "Then we need to talk to Amira again, and this time she's going to tell us everything." "There's something else," Sarah hesitated. "The break-in, the investigation I was conducting. What if it wasn't about your family's business? What if it was about mine?" "What do you mean?" "You said Layla, I, was working on international human rights cases. What if I discovered something in one of those cases, something someone would kill to protect?" Khalid considered this. "It's possible. Your work took you into dangerous territory: war crimes, human trafficking, corporate corruption. You made powerful enemies." "Then we need to find my files, everything I was working on before I disappeared. Maybe the answer is there." "I kept everything. Your office in Dubai, your files here in New York. I couldn't bring myself to clear them out. I kept hoping you'd come back and need them." Khalid's voice was rough with emotion. "Come with me." He led her to a locked room in the penthouse that she hadn't explored yet. Inside was a complete home office, untouched for 3 years. Bookshelves lined with legal texts, a desk covered in organized files, a laptop in the center, closed but waiting. Sarah stepped inside, and immediately her head began to throb. This space knew her. Every book, every file, every pen placement. It was all according to her organization system, a system she didn't remember creating, but somehow understood. "This is mine," Sarah whispered. "This is my space." "I had it sealed after you disappeared. No one has been in here except me, and I only came to sit and remember." Khalid stood in the doorway, giving her space to explore. "Whatever you were investigating, if you documented it, it will be here." Sarah moved to the desk, her hands trembling. She opened the laptop, dead, of course, after 3 years without power. Khalid plugged it in and they waited as it charged enough to boot up. While they waited, Sarah examined the files on the desk: case folders, legal briefs, research notes. One folder was thicker than the others, and when Sarah opened it, her breath caught. Inside were photographs, not family photos, but surveillance images. A man in his late 30s, dark hair, expensive suit, meeting with various other individuals in what looked like covert locations. "Who is this?" Sarah asked. Khalid looked over her shoulder and his entire body went rigid. "That's Rashid, my younger brother." "Why would I have surveillance photos of your brother?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." Khalid pulled out his phone. "Rashid, we need to talk, now. I don't care if you're busy. Drop everything and get to my penthouse within an hour, or I'm coming to find you." He hung up and turned back to the files, pulling out more photos, more documents, bank statements, transfer records, shipping manifests. The more they found, the clearer the picture became. "Layla was investigating Rashid," Khalid said, his voice hollow with betrayal. "My own brother. She found something." The laptop finally booted up. Sarah's hands moved over the keyboard with muscle memory, typing in a password she didn't consciously remember. The screen unlocked. There, in a folder marked "Urgent, Do Not Share," was a document. Sarah opened it, and they both read in growing horror. It was a detailed investigation into an illegal antiquities smuggling ring operating out of Dubai and other Middle Eastern locations. Priceless artifacts were being stolen from archaeological sites, some in war zones, and sold to private collectors around the world. The operation was sophisticated, involving falsified export permits, bribed officials, and a network of dealers. And at the center of it all was Sheikh Al-Rashid. "He was stealing history," Sarah briefed. "Artifacts worth millions, irreplaceable pieces of human heritage, and he was selling them to the highest bidder." Khalid's face was ashen. "There are laws, international treaties that protect cultural heritage. If this became public, it wouldn't just destroy Rashid, it would damage the entire Al-Rashid family, our business interests, our reputation. I found out, Sarah said, understanding dawning. I discovered what he was doing, gathered evidence, and I was going to expose him. That's why he tried to kill me. No, Khalid's voice was firm, absolute. Rashid is many things, arrogant, ambitious, occasionally reckless, but he's not a murderer. He couldn't have... The penthouse door opened. Rashid Al-Rashid walked in, flanked by his own security detail. He was handsome in the way powerful people often are, with the same aristocratic features as Khalid, but a softer edge, a more practiced charm. "Brother, what's so urgent that you—" Rashid stopped dead when he saw Sarah. The color drained from his face. "No, you're dead. You're supposed to be dead." The confession couldn't have been clearer if he had shouted it. Khalid moved with frightening speed, crossing the room and grabbing his brother by the throat, slamming him against the wall. "You tried to kill my wife?" "Khalid, wait! You tried to murder Layla. You left her to die." "I didn't have a choice," Rashid choked out. "She was going to destroy everything, the family, the business, our name. She had evidence, Khalid, evidence that could have sent me to prison for decades. What was I supposed to do?" "Not kill her!" Khalid's roar echoed through the penthouse. His security team rushed in, uncertain whether to intervene. Sarah found her voice, cold and steady. "What happened that night? Tell us everything." Rashid, seeing no escape, slumped in Khalid's grip. "I confronted her. I'd been trying to get the evidence back for months, but she was too smart. She had hidden it, copied it, probably sent it to lawyers. That night, I followed her from the airport. I just wanted to talk, to negotiate, but she refused. She said she was going public with everything, that no amount of money or threats would stop her." "So you attacked her," Khalid said, his voice deadly quiet. "I panicked. We argued. It got physical. She fell, hit her head. There was so much blood. I thought I had killed her." Rashid's eyes were wild with memory. "I drove her far away, left her where I thought no one would find her. I thought it was over." "But she survived. She lost her memory and built a new life, and you got away with it." Sarah stepped closer. "Until now." "I'm sorry." Rashid looked at her, and there might have been genuine remorse in his eyes. "Layla, I never meant it to go that far. You have to believe me." "I don't have to believe anything. You tried to murder me. You left me to die on the side of the road. You destroyed 3 years of my life and put Khalid through hell." Sarah's voice was shaking, but with anger now, not fear. "You're going to prison, Rashid, for attempted murder, for the smuggling, for all of it." "If this goes public, it destroys everyone," Rashid pleaded. "The family, Khalid's business dealings, everything we've built." "Then maybe it should be destroyed," Khalid released his brother, shoving them away. "If our family's reputation is built on lies and crimes and the attempted murder of an innocent woman, then it deserves to fall. Sarah, Layla, whatever name you choose, I'm with you. We expose everything. We let the law deal with him." Rashid's expression hardened. "You'd choose her over your own blood?" "I choose her over a murderer. That's an easy choice." What happened next occurred in seconds, but felt like slow motion. Rashid's hand moved to his jacket, pulling out a gun. Sarah screamed a warning. Khalid threw himself in front of her. The gun fired. But Khalid's security team was faster. Multiple shots rang out, and Rashid crumpled to the floor, blood spreading beneath him. The gun clattered from his hand. Medics were called. Police swarmed the penthouse. In the chaos, Khalid held Sarah, both of them unharmed, but shaking from shock and adrenaline.
"It's over," Khalid whispered into her hair. "It's finally over." But Sarah knew better. The danger was past, yes. Rashid was in custody, wounded but alive enough to face justice. The evidence of his crimes was documented and would be turned over to authorities. But nothing was really over.
because Sarah still didn't remember everything. She had fragments, pieces, glimpses of the life she'd lived as Layla. But 3 years of Sarah Mitchell's existence had created someone new, someone different. The question was, who would she choose to be now? The next week passed in a blur of police statements, legal proceedings, and media frenzy. The story broke globally. Sheikh's wife, presumed dead for 3 years, returns with amnesia after surviving brother-in-law's murder attempt. The antiquities smuggling ring was exposed, with Rashid at its center. International agencies got involved. Interpol, UNESCO, various Middle Eastern governments. Everyone wanted to question Rashid, to recover the stolen artifacts, to understand the scope of the operation. Through it all, Khalid remained by Sarah's side, but she could feel the distance growing between them, could see the questions in his eyes that he was too afraid to ask. It was Detective Chen who finally forced the conversation they'd been avoiding. "Mrs. Al-Rashid, we've recovered most of your memories through therapy and evidence. You remember the investigation, the attack, your life before. What we need to know now is, what do you want to happen next?" Sarah looked at Khalid, then back at Chen. "What do you mean?" "Your identity. Legally, you're Layla Al-Rashid, but you've lived as Sarah Mitchell for 3 years. You have a social security number, a driver's license, a work history. What happens to Sarah Mitchell?" "She doesn't just disappear," Sarah said quietly. "She's real. She's part of who I am now." Chen nodded. "There are legal processes for this. You can reclaim your identity as Layla while acknowledging the years as Sarah. But you'll need to decide, where do you go from here? Back to Dubai? Stay in New York? Resume your legal career? Stay a waitress?" "I don't know." Sarah's voice was barely audible. That night, Sarah and Khalid finally talked. Really talked. They sat on the penthouse terrace, the city lights glittering below them, and laid out the truth. "I remember loving you," Sarah said. "I have the memories back, our wedding, our life together, the happiness we had. But I also remember Sarah Mitchell, the quiet life, the small apartment, the safety of invisibility. And I don't know how to reconcile them." "You don't have to choose one or the other," Khalid said, though his voice betrayed his fear. "You can be both." "Can I?" Layla Al-Rashid, international human rights lawyer, wife of a billionaire sheikh. Sarah Mitchell, Brooklyn waitress with a simple life. They're not compatible, Khalid. They're two different people. "Then who do you want to be?" Sarah was quiet for a long time. "I want to be brave, like Layla. I want to have her confidence, her education, her ability to make a difference. But I also want Sarah's peace, her humility, her understanding of what it's like to struggle." "So be someone new, someone who's both." "What if that person isn't your wife anymore?" There it was, the fear they'd both been harboring. Khalid reached across the space between them and took her hand. "3 years ago, I lost you. For 3 years, I mourned. When I found you again, it felt like a miracle. But you're right. You're not the same person who disappeared. You've survived trauma, built a new life, become someone different. And I..." His voice cracked. "I've changed too. The man you married was arrogant, certain of his place in the world. Losing you broke me, humbled me. I had to learn what really mattered." "So what do we do?" "We start over. Not as Khalid and Layla Al-Rashid, the power couple from before, but as Khalid and Sarah. Two people who've been through hell and are trying to figure out who they are now. We date. We get to know each other again. We see if what we had can be rebuilt into something new. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. You'd do that? You'd let go of Layla and get to know Sarah? I already know Sarah. She's brave enough to refuse a blank check on principle, smart enough to build a life from nothing, strong enough to face her would-be killer and demand justice. I've been falling in love with Sarah since the moment she wrote that note on a napkin. Khalid smiled, and it was the most genuine expression Sarah had seen from him. Layla was my wife, but Sarah could be my future, if you'll have me. Sarah laughed through her tears. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. At least that I remember anyone saying to me. Is that a yes? It said, let's find out. I need time. Time to figure out who I am, what I want. Time not to be anyone's wife or anyone's victim. Just time to be me. Then take all the time you need. I waited 3 years. I can wait longer. They sat together as night deepened, not as husband and wife, but as two people who had found each other twice and were brave enough to try again. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the steps of the federal courthouse in Manhattan, surrounded by reporters and cameras. Behind her stood Detective Chen, federal prosecutors, and representatives from international heritage organizations. 3 years ago, I discovered a criminal enterprise that was stealing irreplaceable artifacts from vulnerable nations. When I tried to expose it, I was nearly killed. I lost my memory, my identity, and 3 years of my life. But I survived, and today, justice has been served. Inside the courthouse, Layla Al-Rashid had just been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for attempted murder, antiquities smuggling, and a host of related crimes. The smuggling ring had been dismantled. Millions of dollars worth of stolen artifacts were being returned to their countries of origin. I'm here today not just as Layla Al-Rashid, the woman who was attacked, but as Sarah Mitchell, the woman who survived and rebuilt. I'm both of these people, and I refuse to apologize for either of them. To others who've survived trauma and lost pieces of themselves, you are not broken, you are transformed, and that transformation can be a source of strength. The press conference concluded, and Sarah turned to find Khalid waiting at the edge of the crowd. They'd spent the past 6 months cautiously rebuilding their relationship. Dinners, walks in the park, long conversations about everything and nothing. He'd met Sarah's Brooklyn friends, the ones who'd known her just as Sarah. She'd traveled to Dubai and met his family, the ones that hadn't tried to kill her anyway. It was slow. It was careful. It was nothing like the passionate whirlwind of their first relationship. It was better. You were amazing up there, Khalid said, falling into step beside her as they walked away from the courthouse. I had a good teacher. Apparently, I used to give speeches all the time. You did. Though I have to say, this version of you is even more impressive. You've survived things that Layla never had to face. They walked to Central Park, where they'd taken to having picnic lunches when Sarah's schedule allowed. She'd returned to Columbia, finishing her law degree that had been interrupted 3 years ago. She was also working part-time at a nonprofit that helped women escaping domestic violence, using both her legal knowledge and her personal experience with trauma. I've been thinking, Khalid said, as they settled on their favorite bench overlooking the lake, about what comes next for us. Sarah's heart rate picked up. They carefully avoided discussing the future beyond the next week, the next date. And? I don't want to pressure you, but I also don't want to waste time being unclear about what I want. Khalid turned to face her fully. I want to marry you. Again, not as the man who married Layla 4 years ago, but as who I am now to who you are now. A real beginning, not a continuation of what we had before. Khalid, let me finish. I know you need more time. I know you're still figuring out your life, your career, who you want to be. I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm asking if you think someday the answer could be yes.
But it had been a beginning, the beginning of truth, the beginning of healing, the beginning of becoming whole. 6 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Sarah and Khalid stood in the same garden where they'd married 4 years before. But this time, the ceremony was different, smaller, more intimate. Sarah's Brooklyn friends mixed with Khalid's family and business associates. Detective Chen was there, as was Dr. Vasquez, the neurologist who'd helped guide Sarah's memory recovery. "I take you, Khalid, to be my husband," Sarah said, her voice clear and steady. "Not as the woman I was or the woman I became, but as the woman I am. All of me, every piece, every fragment, every version. I choose you not because of our past, but because of our future. I choose you with full knowledge and full memory and full heart. And I take you, Sarah, my Layla, my love, my miracle, to be my wife," Khalid responded, tears streaming down his face. "I promise to see all of you, to honor every part of your journey, to never ask you to be less than everything you are. I promise to keep falling in love with you every day as you continue to become whoever you're meant to be." They kissed as the sun set over the garden, and Sarah felt complete in a way she'd never experienced before. Not the false completeness of having a perfect life, but the real completeness of accepting an imperfect one. Not the surface happiness of wealth and status, but the deep joy of being truly known and truly loved. As they walked down the aisle hand in hand, Sarah caught a glimpse of her reflection in one of the garden's decorative mirrors. She saw herself, elegant in her wedding dress, confident in her stance, radiant with happiness. But she also saw the scars, visible and invisible, the gap in her memories that would never fully close, the years she'd lost that could never be recovered. She saw all of it, and she was finally completely okay with it. Because she hadn't just survived, she'd transformed. And that transformation, from Layla to Sarah, to someone entirely new, was her real victory. At the reception, Tom from Miller's Café approached her, looking hilariously out of place among the diplomats and billionaires. "You still can't believe you're actually a sheikh's wife," he said, shaking his head. "You were my best waitress." "I was your only waitress," laughed Sarah. "But thank you for taking a chance on someone with no references and no memory. You gave Sarah Mitchell a life when she had nothing. You earned that life. You were a hard worker, honest, kind to everyone." Tom paused. "Are you going to be okay? This world you're in now, it's a long way from Brooklyn diners." Sarah looked around at the lavish reception, then at Khalid across the room, watching her with love and patience. "I'll bring Brooklyn to it. That's the plan anyway. Use the resources and platform I have now to help people like Sarah was, people starting over, people who need a chance. Khalid and I are starting a foundation for survivors of violent crime, helping them rebuild their lives." "That's good. That's real good." Tom hugged her. "You make sure he treats you right, or I'll come up here and set him straight." "I have no doubt you would." As the evening continued, Sarah found herself on the terrace with Amira,
who had become an unexpected ally over the past months. "I'm sorry," Amira said quietly, "for how I acted when you first came back. I was protecting Khalid, but I was also protecting myself. I'd suspected Rashid for years, but never had the courage to confront him. You did what I couldn't. You tried to warn me. In your way, you were brave. Not as brave as you. Losing your memory, surviving alone, building a new life, and then facing your attacker and demanding justice. That's courage I'm not sure I possess. You'd be surprised what you can survive when you have no choice." Sarah squeezed Amira's hand. "Thank you for being honest with me, eventually, and for standing by Khalid when he needed family." As midnight approached, Khalid found Sarah on the garden's edge, looking up at the stars. "Tired?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Happy," she corrected. "Completely. Overwhelmingly happy." "Is this real? Sometimes I still can't believe I get to have this." "It's real. We're real." Khalid rested his chin on her shoulder. "But I have to admit, there's a part of me that's terrified I'll wake up and you'll be gone again, that this is all a dream." "Then we'll be terrified together, and we'll remind each other every day that we're real, we're here, and we're not going anywhere." They stood together under the stars, and Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them here. The violence and trauma, the loss and confusion, the slow rebuilding of identity and trust. It hadn't been a fairy tale. It had been messy and painful and real. But it had led them here, to this moment, to this love. And that was worth every scar. Years later, Sarah would write a memoir about her experience, not as a tragedy, but as a testament to resilience. She would speak at conferences, help pass legislation protecting crime victims, and establish programs for people recovering from trauma-induced amnesia. She would become one of the most respected voices in human rights law, not despite her experience, but because of her experience. And Khalid would be beside her every step of the way, not as her keeper or her rescuer, but as her partner in every sense of the word. But that was the future. On this perfect autumn night, they were simply two people who had found each other twice against impossible odds, and were brave enough to choose love over fear, hope over despair, and the beautiful complexity of reality over the false simplicity of forgetting. Sarah Mitchell had been born from trauma and loss. Layla Al-Rashid had been nearly destroyed by betrayal and violence. But the woman who stood in that garden, married to a man who loved every version of her, was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had taken the broken pieces of two lives and forged them into something unbreakable. She was the woman who refused to blank check because she valued integrity over wealth. She was the woman who survived what should have killed her and built a new existence from nothing. She was the woman who faced her would-be killer and demanded justice. She was the woman who loved deeply enough to rebuild trust after ultimate betrayal. She was Layla. She was Sarah. She was both and neither, and more than the sum of her parts. She was, finally and completely, herself. And that, she knew with absolute certainty, was the real happy ending. Not the wedding or the reunion or the justice served, but the moment when she looked in the mirror and recognized the woman looking back. All of her, every fragment, every transformation, every scar, every triumph. The moment when she became whole, not by forgetting the past or erasing her trauma, but by accepting every piece of her story and choosing to write the rest of it on her own terms. That was the moment Sarah Layla Al-Rashid truly came home, not to a place or a person, but to herself. And in finding herself, she found everything else that mattered.